So whenever I get asked, what's the best way to improve your food photography? Inevitably, my response will be something to the effect of, practice, practice, practice. That the more intentional time and effort you put into your food photography, the more over time you'll see an improvement in your images. And absolutely 100%, I believe in that. However, I got to thinking that there are some things that I do in preparing for my shoots that help set me up for success that you can put into play today that will have an instant impact on your food photography. What's shakin' bacon? I'm Joni Simon. Welcome to my studio. This is where I do food photography, and the goal here is to improve your food photography skills so you can feel confident behind the camera. And like I mentioned today, I'm sharing some of my strategies that I put into play as I'm preparing for a shoot that I think that will really help you in setting up your shoot. Because I vividly remember being in that place where you're setting up your photo shoot, you're putting the food in place, and then you're just like taking a bunch of pictures, hoping that one or two of them will be good enough to use, whereas instead what I really want you to work on is really intentionally crafting your scene, setting things up, and getting a great image on purpose. So to help illustrate these strategies today, I cooked up a deep dish pizza for you. Now, if you're not familiar with deep dish pizza, it hails from the fabulous city of Chicago, Illinois, and when we say it's pizza, I mean it's a whole different animal in comparison to like New York style pizza or Italian style pizza. Like, it is nearly a casserole is how I qualify it. It's deep, it's thick, it's full of fillings and cheese and all sorts of fabulousness. Now, what I will say is it's also a very controversial food topic, so I'm sure I'm gonna hear about it in the comments below. But despite whatever opinions there are of deep dish pizza, I found this recipe in a cookbook and I really wanted to make it and I really wanted to photograph it. So here we are. So number one in preparing for a shoot is to test the recipe. You can have fantastic lighting, the best props, a really great background, everything's going right, but if the food doesn't look the way that it should, no amount of camera tricks is going to make that food look better. So for example, this deep dish pizza. I have never made deep dish pizza before. Sure, I've got a great recipe from a cookbook, but I don't necessarily know exactly how this recipe is gonna perform. Is it gonna turn out the way that I have in my head? Like, what's gonna go wrong with it? So in order to understand that, I have to test the recipe out. So the very first time trying this recipe, I realized that I didn't roll out the dough thin enough and I didn't get enough like edges around the crust. So we didn't really have as much like deep dish effect as I wanted. So that's when we jumped into then a second round of testing, and I got the crust great the second time. It came up high, it was really nice and crispy, nice amount of thinness, but because I had so much more filling and also because I added a lot more sauce, it ended up super runny. And that was even after letting it sit for like 30 minutes, because that's definitely what you want to do with things like casseroles or things with a lot of moisture and juices and fillings in them. We want to let them sit just so that that kind of all comes down and you can get a really nice clean slice out of it. But even after that, I still had a lot of liquid going on. And so that's when I went into the third test of this recipe and totally nailed the crust. And as far as the fillings, I strained the sauce and I also made sure to blot all of the veggies and then gave it a solid 45 minutes to rest before slicing into it. Now, obviously this takes a lot of time to familiarize yourself with the recipes and test them out. Now, if you're a food blogger, obviously you're cooking your own recipes, so hopefully you're pretty familiar with how they work and how they're gonna turn out and the best way to cook those so that they'll photograph well. But if you're like me and you're shooting for clients and you're getting their recipes, which you've never tried before, then you are gonna wanna make sure to account for that time in putting together a proposal for them. Or you want to work with a food stylist, because a food stylist is worth their weight in gold in terms of saving you time, because a good food stylist should have a culinary background, should understand how different food behaves, and be able to take that guesswork out of it for you and be able to execute it right away. Now, one pro tip, if you are testing out your recipe multiple times and you're ending up with a bunch of leftovers, which certainly are great to eat or great to freeze, but I also like to hang on to one of them that I can use as my stunt double for when I get into the actual shoot, because it's really great to have something that's going to be roughly the same as that final hero version to set your lighting, to set the props, make sure all the colors, make sure everything looks good. But then once you do have that beautifully browned, perfect version of your hero recipe, that you can put that into place and be ready to rock. Number 2 is better quality inspiration. So for any given photo shoot, I will do image research. I will look for images of deep dish pizzas, of regular pizzas, pies, other things that are similar to what I'm photographing to get an idea of like, what's a good angle of approach for this? And how am I gonna frame it? What are some of the props? This is where you can get some really great ideas to help inspire your images. But the thing is, a lot of folks will go to like Instagram or Pinterest for these pictures, which is totally fine. But I personally find Instagram and Pinterest have a lot of like recycled concepts, the same sort of like visual imagery and style. And I'm usually looking for something a little different to kind of break outside of that. I personally find better quality inspiration in cookbooks and magazines, which makes sense because you think about it, cookbooks and magazines, those images are being created by top professionals, food photographers, stylists, prop stylists. They're just more intentionally produced images, and I find a lot more variety. So depending on kind of the look you're going for, is this more of a Bon Appetit or is this a Southern Living or a Food Network magazine? Like they all have different aesthetics and you can get some great inspiration. And that's why I subscribe to several magazines so that I've got a constant influx of new images, new inspiration coming into the studio. I can keep an eye on upcoming trends, get inspired. And one of my ultimate favorites is Art Culinaire. It's definitely more like the fine dining scene, haute cuisine. It's, a little avant-garde, but I get some really great inspiration. And if you're a food photographer, just thumbing through the pages of it, you'll start drooling. But this deep dish pizza, for example, I was inspired by some images that I saw in a cookbook that I recently received as a gift, and I really liked it because it was very different in terms of the lighting, different than what I typically do. So it kind of took me outside my comfort zone, made me think about things differently, and I think ultimately gave me a better final image. Now maybe you're thinking though, Joni, you're looking at other people's images and stealing their ideas? Absolutely. If it's okay for Pablo Picasso, it's okay for me. But also, if you haven't read Steal Like an Artist, I highly recommend it. It's such a great read to really help you see and understand how you can use the ideas you see around you to inspire you and ultimately cultivate your own sense of style. And then number 3 is to sketch the scene. This to me is absolutely vital so that you're not in that situation where you're like, you've got the food ready and you set it out and then you're like, okay, wait, where do the props go? Where does everything go? And you're like fumbling and futzing and making yourself crazy until finally you've got it all where you want it, but now the food doesn't look as great as it did. So what I do instead is before I sit down with the food, I've taken all those inspiration images, I've got a really good sense of what the food is gonna look like, and I just take a pencil and put it to paper. Now, these do not need to be works of art. These can literally just be like circles and squiggles and things like that, as long as you know what they represent, but that you can really get a sense of the visuals of where are the lines, how's the composition gonna work. If you need help with composition, I've got a series right up over here that you can go check out. But the purpose of the sketch is just to have a really good jumping off point. Sure, there'll be little tweaks and adjustments and changes once you actually get in there with the real food and the props, but take a little bit of the guesswork out of it by sketching it beforehand. So now that I've shared my strategies, if you have any pre-shoot strategies, feel free to share those down in the comments below so that we can all learn together. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and be sure to hit the subscribe button because I'm going to be back next week with another video. I don't want you to miss it. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great week and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.